very happy to be here today with this call because we will talk about the MAPS module in a Latin American country that's a member of the OECD. And I think that it will be beneficial not only for Costa Rica, but for other countries in the region and for other OECD countries regarding how to professionalize the assessment of public procurement. First of all, I'd like to invite Elias Solé, Ambassador, a permanent representative of Costa Rica to the OECD, to address the audience. Ambassador, please go ahead, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank the PGC of the OECD and the MAP Secretariat for inviting me and for having me here, giving these opening remarks, for organizing this event, and for the great collaboration with Costa Rica. This is why we have this very valuable analysis as an input for the continuous improvement of our public procurement practices. In Costa Rica, we've always been aware of the strategic potential of procurement as a catalyzer of very important topics for our society that match the agenda of the OECD. And I'm talking about topics such as innovation, developing SMEs, responsible business practices, environmental protection, and the consolidation of public policies that aim to improving social processes. So it's important that the process of Costa Rica to access the OECD, especially for public governance, really catalyzed reflection and profound debate in our country. So this is why the changes and reforms happened in our country when it comes to public procurement. As a result of this comprehensive assessment, Costa Rica was able to identify a lot of areas of opportunity. And I must highlight the ones in transparency, efficiency, and competitiveness in public procurement processes. And there was an important reform that took place as a result of this in 2019, but this reform only came into effect in December 2022 because we had to rearrange structural matters in the public sphere so that the reform could become operational, and also to train the public servants on this matter. The current public procurement law includes the most efficient international practices, several suggestions from the OECD, and it was preceded by a three-phase project that was developed together with this organization. The first phase was dedicated to see procedures, exceptions. The second one, the thresholds and the comparison with other OECD countries. And the third section was the key sections to improve public procurement in Costa Rica. And I must highlight as one of the most important cornerstones of this very significant reform, the creation and strengthening of the Bureau of Public Procurement of the Ministry of Finance. We created the Public Procurement National Plan. We proposed the pertinent regulatory reforms, and we also manage the professionalization of public servants, managing the unified system, among others. And after executing this comprehensive reform that I mentioned before, Costa Rica has continued to work together with the OECD in implementing this reform, also improving the institutional framework of and citizen participation and the professionalization of public procurement. And just like we will see in the great report that will be presented in this call, this reform acknowledges the importance of developing strategy for the professionalization of procurement, including framework for training and certification. The MAPS certification module not only helps us to diagnose the key elements of the strategy, but it also gives us very significant matters that have to be worked on moving forward. so that we can continue helping the professional development, so that the strategy is feasible and sustainable in the long term. We consider that this deep collaboration with international partners has been useful to drive, to giving us a push, to give us a push, and to implement this reform in an acceptable period of time. If we compare it with previous efforts, this has been very efficient, and I really hope that the experience of Costa Rica is useful for other processes in other regions. And I would like to thank again the OECD for having me, and we are very excited on um, on this because of this call. So now I will give the floor to the OECD team, and thank you very much for having me. Thank you very much, Mr.
Como lo
Ambassador.
mencionó al
And
final,
just like you
ahora me
said
gustaría invitar a
towards the
Paulo
end, I
Magina,
would like
jefe de la División de
to
Infraestructura
invite
y Contratación
Paulo
Pública de la
Magina, head of
OCDE,
the Infrastructure and
a
Public
que
Procurement
nos
Division
tome
of
las
the
palabras
OECD,
de apertura. Adelante,
to
Paulo.
address the
Gracias,
audience.
Nico. Es un placer estar
Thank you,
acá y
Nico. It is a
compartir con
pleasure to be
ustedes
here and to
los
share with
resultados de
you
esta importante
the results of
evaluación.
this very
Y a
important assessment.
continuación voy continuar
And now
en
I will
inglés.
continue in
As
English.
the ambassador said, for us, it has been a very interesting collaboration with Costa Rica even before the accession process. And the ambassador kindly laid out some of our results based on this extensive collaboration. And I'm very pleased to be part of this exercise and to launch the MAPS professionalization report done by the OECD with the support of the Inter-American Development Bank. As you know, one of the main challenges in public procurement is precisely to address its strategic value. It's 13% of GDP. Procurement represents 13% of GDP in OECD countries. So it's an important tool for governments to achieve broader outcomes. And this important tool requires, of course, capacities and capabilities of the procurement workforce. And this has been recognized in most of the OECD countries. They have been investing a lot on reinforcing the capabilities of the procurement workforce. And we believe Costa Rica is heading in this right direction, as you will see throughout the webinar. The strategic plan for professionalization of the procurement workforce that was published in May following the MAPS exercise incorporates already many of the OECD recommendations, and now the challenges lies on the implementation, of course. We would like to suggest to Costa Rica to consider other good practices that we also recommend related to the establishment and development of a competency matrix, like 40% of the OECD countries are already doing, or establishing a certification framework for procurement officials, like more than 1/3 of OECD countries are currently doing. And finally, strengthening the collaboration and the cooperation with knowledge centers, universities, and research bodies as well, like practically all OECD countries are also doing. We believe this MAPS report is a foundation exercise for Costa Rica to advance the professionalization of their procurement workforce. And we would like to stand by Costa Rica and other countries in the region, OECD and non-OECD members, and to further explore the use of the MAPS as a tool for reforms. I would like to thank, of course, the country, Costa Rica, for their input and support in doing this MAPS exercise, and also, of course, the Inter-American Development Bank for their financial support and knowledge also in exploring this possibility. It's the first time that an OECD country is doing a professionalization evaluation using the MAPS, and we intend to continue doing so and explore the more countries doing this type of exercise. Thank you, Nico. Gracias.
Muchas gracias por esas palabras, Paulo.
Thank you very much, Paulo, for your kind
Ahora me
words.
gustaría
Now,
invitarte,
I would like to
como bien lo
invite,
dijo Paulo, pues este
just
esfuerzo
like
no se
Paulo
puede
mentioned,
hacer,
well, this wouldn't
obviamente,
have been
sin la
possible
colaboración y sin el
without the
interés desde el primer
collaboration
momento
and
del
the
gobierno de Costa
interest
Rica.
of the government of
Me
Costa
gustaría
Rica.
invitar entonces
And
a
now I
Miguel
would like to
Hernández
invite
Mejía,
Miguel
subdirector
Hernandez
de
Mejía,
Contratación
Deputy
Pública,
Director of Public
Ministerio de
Procurement
Hacienda de Costa Rica.
from the
Contratación
Ministry of
Pública
Finance
posee
of
unas
Costa
palabras
Rica.
de apertura en este evento. Adelante, Miguel.
Gracias, don Nicolás. Muy
Thank
buenos
you very
días para
much,
todos y
Nicolas.
todas.
Good morning,
Para
everyone.
ECOPI, para este servidor, es
For
muy
myself and
importante
for
la realización de estos
our
webinars
country,
y
it is
también
very
quiero
important to
darles
have this
una
webinar,
cordial
and I would
bienvenida.
also like to welcome each and every
Este
one of
webinar
you.
fue organizado en colaboración
This
con la
webinar was
OCDE,
organized
en
together
el
with
cual
the
nos reunimos
OECD,
para analizar el
and
estudio
here we're
generado a través de la
gathering to
metodología
see
MAPS.
the study
Este
developed
proceso nos
through the
ha brindado una
MAPS
excelente
methodology. This
oportunidad para
process has
compartir
provided us a
ideas,
great opportunity to
mensajes
share
y
ideas,
principalmente
learnings,
reforzar nuestro
and most
compromiso
of
con
all,
la
to
mejora
reinforce
continua
our commitment
del subsistema de
to
contratación
continuous
pública,
improvement of
que
the
debe ser tendiente
public
a
procurement
incrementar la
subsystem,
generación de valor
which
público para
must
los ciudadanos
increase the
y
public
ciudadanas
value
del
for
país.
citizens in our
El
country.
camino hacia la profesionalización no es
A path
sencillo,
towards
lo sabemos,
professionalization is
pero
not
estamos
easy, we
convencidos
know
que es
it,
un paso
but
fundamental
we
para alcanzar
also know
altos
that it is a
estándares de
fundamental
eficiencia,
step to reach
transparencia y
high
ética.
standards of
La
efficiency,
aprobación de
transparency,
este
and
plan
ethics.
estratégico de
The
profesionalización
approval of this
que
strategic
discutiremos más adelante en este webinar
professionalization plan that will be
representa un
discussed
avance para
later on
nuestro
in this
país,
webinar
tal como lo
represents
mencionaron el
a lot of
presidente y
progress
nuestros
for our
dos
country, just like
compañeros.
Mr.
Nos va a
Ambassador and
permitir
our other
alinearnos
colleagues also
con las
already
mejores
mentioned.
prácticas
It will allow us to
internacionales
align
y
ourselves with the best
además
international
facilita
practices,
fortalecer las
and it also
competencias del
facilitates
personal
and
que tiene la gran
strengthens
responsabilidad de
the
gestionar las compras del Estado.
skills
Y de
of the
paso potenciar
workforce
algunas
that are
políticas del
involved in
país
public
que están
procurement.
asociadas
And
con la
it can also
contratación
improve certain
pública estratégica
public policies that
para
have to do with
facilitar
strategic
el
public procurement
desarrollo
to
económico y social
facilitate
con respeto al ambiente,
social and financial
además de
and
la
economic
innovación en las compras
growth,
públicas del
besides
Estado.
also innovation in a
Sabemos que
public procurement
enfrentamos
in our
retos
country. We know that
significativos,
we are facing
sin
significant
embargo, con la
challenges.
colaboración
However, with
interinstitucional y el apoyo de
interinstitutional
organizaciones como la OCDE,
cooperation,
el
the
BID
support
y la
from
OEA,
organizations such as the
así como el
OECD,
compromiso de cada uno
IDB, and
de los socios y
OAS, as well as the
funcionarios
commitment of
que estén a
each
cargo de
one
los
of
procesos de
the
contratación pública,
people that are in
hará que la
charge of
implementación de este
public
plan sea
procurement,
exitosa.
I'm sure that the implementation of this
Quiero
plan will be
agradecer
successful.
especialmente al
I would
BID
like to
por el
especially
apoyo en el
thank the
financiamiento.
IDB because
Este
of their
estudio
support
y el
in
equipo a cargo por
funding
parte de la OCDE,
this
ya que han
um,
realizado un invaluable
project.
aporte
And
para la
also,
impresión
I
y
would like
evaluación
to
del plan.
thank the team from the
Nos ha
OECD
permitido
that
identificar
helped us
áreas claves de mejora
in
y
order to
ofrecer una
identify
visión integral de lo que
areas
necesitamos
of
para lograr la
improvement and to have a
profesionalización en Costa
comprehensive
Rica.
vision of what we need
Sin más
for
momento y
professionalization
esperando
of
que este
Costa
webinar sea
Rica.
de mucha
Without
ayuda
further
para
ado, and
ustedes y
I hope
clientes.
this webinar will be
Muchísimas
very
gracias y
useful.
que tengan un
Um,
bonito día.
I would like to say goodbye, and
Muchas
I
gracias,
hope
Miguel.
everyone has a
Eh,
great day.
Simplemente
Thank you,
antes
Miguel.
de seguir
Well,
con Javier,
before
quiero recordar a
we go
quienes
to Javier, I would like
apenas están
to
conectando que
remind
hay
everyone that's just
interpretación
logging in that
español-inglés.
we have
For everyone who has
English and
just
Spanish
connected to
translation.
this webinar, there is interpretation available from Spanish to English using the interpretation button that you will find at the bottom of your screen. Bueno, y finalmente, como lo mencionaron, este
And just
ejercicio
like
contó con el
it has been
apoyo
mentioned,
del
this
principio
exercise
del BID,
couldn't have been done without the
el
support
principio
of
de
the IDB,
profesionalización. Sabemos que es muy importante
because
también para el
professionalization, we
banco.
know that is
Entonces,
very
me
important for the
gustaría oír
IDB.
unas
So
palabras
we
de
would
apertura
like
ya
to
finales de Javier Dávila
hear
Pérez,
the words from
jefe de
Javier
división
Davila
de la división
Perez, Division
financiera
Chief of the
de
Operation
operaciones y
Financial
servicios de
Management and
adquisiciones
Procurement
del Banco
Services
Interamericano de
from
Desarrollo.
the IDB.
Javier, adelante, por favor.
Please, Javier, the floor is yours. Thank you, Nicolas. First of all, I'd like to thank Sebastian, the government of Costa Rica, and of course the OECD for inviting me to participate in this webinar. And I would also like to greet each and every one of the attendees in this webinar. Miguel Hernandez Mejia, Deputy Director of Public Procurement, Ambassador Permanent Representative of Costa Rica to the OECD, Ambassador Elias Soli, Pablo Magina, who's always with us in these very important events, and also Nicolas, as head of the MAPS Secretariat. And of course, I would like to thank my colleagues, the professionalization team from the IDB that are focused on promoting these kinds of actions and events in the region. Patricia Martinalgo, Edian, and Adriana Salazar, who I'm sure you all know. So public procurement, just like you all know, are a very important component of the Bureau of Public Procurement, but also of the governance of each and every country and sustainable and inclusive growth of our economies. This is why strengthening public procurement systems is key to build efficient and effective institutions, and so that each and every country can reach their own development goals. A robust and sound system of public procurement translates into better services, better projects, better infrastructure, and in general, in better expenditure and better government. We have a very robust procurement system allows us to maximize the impact of each and every one of the projects that promote the development of the countries, both the ones that are financed by the multilateral bank and also banks, and also the ones that are financed by their own funds, and also to provide better services for the population. So having a good public procurement system has a lot of very positive effects. This is why the IDB, being a strategic partner of the countries in our region, supports all initiatives to improve public procurement systems, such as this one that Costa Rica is conducting. But in order to generate and implement an action plan that allows us to drive this reform of public procurement systems, we need two very important things. The first one is we need to have a complete and objective diagnosis of the public procurement model in each country. This allows us to know the strengths and also to know the opportunities for improvement of the systems in order to improve them and to develop a plan to close the gaps and to implement best practices. And the second element that's very important is we need to have a professional workforce that successfully implement this plan. This second element is the one that led us to support this assessment that aims to not only get to know the current status of the public procurement system, but also to know how we can improve the professionalization of this very important activity. So professionalization is so important that we, from the beginning in the bank, participated actively in this module, this professionalization module of MAPS. And it is so important that we at the bank are currently implementing a professionalization program together with the OECD. And not only that, but we are also working with other agencies such as the World Bank, as the Caribbean Development Bank. We will be launching a regional strategy that we are currently working on. But we are here gathered in this webinar today to get to know the result of the professionalization module of MAPS in Costa Rica. The IDB was committed since the beginning because this is a starting point for new opportunities of collaboration with Costa Rica. For us, it is we are extremely happy to have been able to support Costa Rica with this, and we are very happy to be here and to hear about the results that will be extremely positive for the country to improve the skills and competencies of the procurement workforce. So we would like to thank the OECD for supporting this important assessment. Also, the different entities, the different agencies in Costa Rica and civil society that have participated in MAPS assessment. So congratulations, and we are looking forward to the results of this assessment by the specialist of the OECD. Thank you very much. Thank you, Javier. And we would like to thank the support of the IDB for this exercise. And just like you said, you also helped in the creation of this professionalization module that was led by the IDB together with other banks and MAPS partners. So thank you very much for that. Now, after these kind words, we will give the floor to Jacobo Garcia Villarreal, Senior Specialist on Integrity and Procurement Policies of the OECD. He will tell us about the main conclusions and recommendations of the MAPS professionalization assessment in Costa Rica. Please go ahead, Jacobo. The floor is yours. Thank you, Nicolas. Good morning, good afternoon, or evening, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you for being here. I would like to greet Mr. Ambassador Elias Soleil, my colleagues Paulo, Nicolas, Javier, and the entire team of the IDB. It's very clear the potential of this joint work that was conducted between the OECD, the IDB, and also our colleagues from Costa Rica, Arelis. I'd like to thank each and every one of you that participated in this assessment. So as you all know, a MAPS methodology has 4 pillars that are applied for the basic MAPS assessment, the 360 assessment, and also to the different modules. And these are the 4 pillars that you can see on the screen. They all have their indicators and sub-indicators. The first one is a legal, regulatory, and policy framework. The second one is the institutional framework and management capacity. The third one is procurement operations and market practices. And the fourth one, accountability, integrity, and transparency. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about the application of the methodology and the background. This is important because when we apply the methodology, I mean, for the first time, we didn't really have a professionalization strategy in Costa Rica. This was published in May 2024, and now I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So we worked on the indicator matrix in May and June 2023. We had a mission in September where we had meetings, workshops with different stakeholders, universities, public agencies, and of course, based on the level of procurement, the most important or the most significant stakeholders, business chambers, among others. So we conducted several surveys as per the methodology in the second half of 2023, especially the one for public servants. It was over 800 people were surveyed. The National Council for Roadworks, the National Institute for Learning, the National Bank of Costa Rica, the Institute of Electricity of Costa Rica, and the Municipality of San Jose. So those 881 procurement officers represent 90% of the procurement workforce for the 6 entities. The preliminary version was delivered in December 2023. Since Costa Rica, I mean, the DCOP, or the Bureau of Public Procurement, had to present the strategy in May 2024. This is why we presented a preliminary version in December 2023. And then, based on the methodology, we had a validation workshop in San Jose on April 16th, 2024, where all the stakeholders that I mentioned before participated. Then we had the review from the technical group, also as per the MAPS methodology that took place in June and July, and then the final publication of the report in August, that was published on August 5th, 2024. So I'd also like to talk about the background, which I think is important. Public procurement in Costa Rica represents about 15% of government expenditure. And just like it happens in other OECD countries, this expenditure goes to sectors that are very important for the well-being of the population. For instance, out of this percentage, 35% goes for the health sector, 21% for the education sector. There's some other sectors that are also critical for well-being of the citizens. And just like it was mentioned before, Costa Rica has followed a process of different reforms that moved forward during the process of accession of Costa Rica to the OECD. And then new reforms came about that are reflected in Law 9986, published in May 2021, where we know that a professionalization strategy for the procurement workforce is necessary. So the objective of MAPS was to provide guidelines, good practices, and strategies to develop this professionalization plan. And we found that there were some institutions, for instance, that had improved their public procurement, that, for instance, the Social Security Institute of Costa Rica, maybe due to the direct impact of public procurement has in healthcare services, but also due to very important leadership from the leadership the, that have really given a priority for this public procurement agency. And also, for instance, in the National Bank of Costa Rica, we found innovations in the national context, such as having a record or a logbook of public procurement officials. So now let's go into each and every one of the pillars of the MAPS methodology. Now, pillar number one, we found that Law 9986 sets out professionalization as a strategic objective, and also there's a general mandate to develop a strategy. In this document and also in the regulations or in the rules, some roles and responsibilities are described for the DCOP and for the supplierships, institutional supplierships. And something I'd like to highlight here is that we needed to assign roles and responsibilities for other agencies or institutions that are not as explicit in these documents, that could be expanded. And we found that even though there are no formal hindrances or barriers for the participation of the private sector in the professionalization market, there are some informal barriers. And by this, I mean that in the survey for the public procurement workforce, around 40% either disagreed or strongly disagreed that they are free to choose professionalization services. However, during the workshop, we also discussed this topic, and we found, or the comments that we heard, was that oftentimes institutions set out certain requirements to guarantee a minimum level of quality of the services. So there are some guidelines that need to be followed to select or to choose the professionalization service that a public official wants to use or wants to procure. We also found that the law sets forth certain elements for training and certification. And we also know that professionalization will be useful to make progress in strategic objectives. And actually, strategic public procurement is included in this new act, in this new law, and it connects the professionalization of the function with the strategic public procurement. We also found that we didn't have a definition of priority objectives, mechanisms of assessment of impact, profiles, career patterns, and learning patterns for public procurement officials. So in this pillar, our recommendations are the following. The guidelines and secondary regulations that need to be developed must establish rules for the participation in the market of professionalization, for instance, including profiles, the matrix of competencies that Paulo briefly mentioned. And we also found that by developing this strategy, we needed to start by assessing the current professionalization level. So it's just like a gap analysis, knowledge analysis, in order to know where we are standing and our weaknesses and strengths. And actually, in the MAPS exercise, we analyze this through the survey in order to draft the strategy and to establish monitoring strategies. Also, the DCOP must develop a matrix of competencies and also a certification framework. So once we identified what the procurement is that's needed, we need to see our weak points, we need to address them, and then we need a certification framework in order to make sure that this learning actually took place. The strategy must take into account an implementation window by stages. This wasn't taken into account from the beginning. And it's also very important or critical to map out the stakeholders. And we made a lot of progress in the mission that took place in September. Now let's go to pillar number 2. We found that the Ministry of Finance already had a virtual campus. In some tools, they had a virtual campus to provide training, and also they have virtual community to exchange experiences. And this was, I would say, rather informal, but it was useful to exchange experiences and good practices. We also found that a critical element that was not taken into account in the legal framework is the dichotomy that the public procurement officer needs. I mean, hard skills and also soft skills. And the strategy also takes into account annual and multi-annual professionalization plans, both at a whole government level and at an agency level, and also assessment of gaps, competencies, and mechanisms to assess and follow up on these. And we also need to leverage some databases that we already have in Costa Rica, such as the Observatory of Public Procurement and the SIAC, which is managed by the General Comptroller's Office of the Republic, as well as the application of the new law of public employment, which doesn't only focus on procurement, but there are some requirements of that law that can be leveraged to improve the professionalization process for public procurement. Now, the recommendations are to include the development of the framework of competencies by levels. For instance, we can have a junior level, intermediate, advanced, and expert, so that the matrix of competencies has this both soft and hard skills taken into account. And also, as part of the accreditation of the supplierships, this strategy must determine processes for a formal and systematic assessment. I talked about leveraging the mandate of a new law to create the plans for the different supplierships, and also to design mechanisms to monitor and assess that can be smart, specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. And also, the certification framework needs to include some good practices, such as determining who the owner of the process is, the levels of certifications that would be applied, the requirements. For instance, if we will have tests or knowledge checks, whether these certifications be mandatory or discretionary, the content of the tests, if the certification will be valid for a certain amount of time, all these kinds of details. And actually, something else that we do in this matrix is we illustrate some international examples of how this works in different OECD countries. Now, pillar number 3, which is procurement operations and market practices. Here we found an important red flag because we need to strengthen the DCOP when it comes to human resources and financial resources in order to continue with this professionalization strategy. We also found that in order to elevate public procurement as a profession, we need to make it attractive. I mean, the public procurement career must be attractive by managing human resources, by having both financial and non-financial incentives as well. We also found that the training offer in the market is rather limited, and the quality is not that great. So there is an area of opportunity to work together with knowledge centers, universities, and the academia in general. The recommendations for this pillar is to provide an estimate of the amount and the timeline of the resources that will be necessary for this process. We also need to weigh or to think about the establishment of an institute for training that could be funded with budgetary resources, or we could also have some income due to services or a mixture of these two. This, of course, is something difficult due to the fiscal situation of Costa Rica, but one option would be that they not only use budgetary resources, but that they also generate income or revenue based on their services. The professionalization strategy must be attractive to attract and retain the right human resources with financial incentives, but also with non-financial incentives, such as training opportunities, awards, and so on and so forth. And lastly, we must also set forth the characteristics of the certification model as a cornerstone of this method. And lastly, the fourth pillar, which is accountability, integrity, and transparency. Here we see that the regulatory framework tells us that we need to incorporate considerations of ethics and integrity. And this is something that was backed up almost 100% by the officials that took the survey. The National Strategy for Integrity and Prevention of Corruption includes activities to mitigate these risks in public procurement, but there are no elements to include this management based on results. And we also found that the audit reports from the Comptroller's Office of the Republic are public, but we did find some weaknesses. For instance, even though officials can be denounced before the Agency of Public Ethics, this institution does not process anonymous calls. And we have been strengthening the process of these calls. Actually, the Comptroller's Office checks data from different sources to identify red flags. And this, of course, is a good practice. And finally, the recommendations for this pillar are to anticipate the design of key indicators, key performance indicators to facilitate result management and to facilitate anonymous reports, because they are not anonymous right now. So thank you very much. That was it. And now I would like to give the floor back to Nicolas. Thank you, Jacobo, and thank you for summarizing that. I know it's very difficult to summarize all the information that you have, but I think you did a really good job. It was very useful to see what the OECD found in professionalization of Costa Rica. So now I would like to hear Arelis Chavarria Loria, coordinator of the Professionalization and Certification Unit of the Directorate of Public Procurement, Ministry of Finance of Costa Rica. And she will talk about the way forward.
Comentar el día de hoy. Entonces, Arelis.
So, Arelis, please go ahead. The floor is yours. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us in this very important presentation. I would like to start by thanking the team of the OECD, Jacobo, Paulo, who were with us throughout. And we know that there's more people backstage that work in giving out recommendations in order to have this input on a timely manner. So, like it has been mentioned before, the professionalization plan was approved by the Authority of Public Procurement on May 31st. This has been published in the website of the Ministry of Finance. This plan has three very important inputs. One provided by the ASPROCA, or the Association of Professionals in Public Procurement, who conducted a study and surveys to diagnose the level of professionalization in public procurement in Costa Rica, together with the Konrad Adenauer Foundation in March 2022. And the IDB helped us in two very important projects. The first one with the INGP, where a strategic professionalization plan was presented for the Public Procurement Authority in Costa Rica based on an initial diagnosis. And we were also able to have a draft of the input provided by the OECD through the MAPS methodology, which is the one that we will delve into in the next few minutes. So the plan has several levels and one professionalization sub-level. So we start from a basic level 1 with a public service, then basic number 2, which is an efficient public expenditure. And here it's important to mention or to highlight the importance of the public procurement workforce. I mean, they need to know where their process comes from and how the budgets are executed, how they are approved. Then basic level number 3, which has to do with public procurement. It's a basic public procurement level. And then there's two specialization, one by role or profile. These profiles have to do with procurement, the execution of the contract. Then there's a role of a legal advisor, and there's another role, which is a control role. And the last specialization, which is by topic, and it includes topics such as healthcare, technology, public works. There's a specialization in sustainability, public procurement, innovation. And this is a sub-level that we see here at the bottom left corner. This sub-level is a small education program that was implemented for public procurement workforce that work outside of the supplierships, that also set forth criteria within the financial or the treasury departments of the different institutions. So each one of these levels also includes their own objectives, the basic content of each one of the levels. And based on this basic 3 level, we establish certain incentives that we will cover in a couple of minutes that are relevant for each one of the levels to provide an incentive for the participation of these public procurement officials in these processes. So this is the incentive plan, which includes certificates and diplomas by means of professional networks, the publication of success cases, and there's also the base of educators and scholarships. Some of them don't have to do with the competencies of the DCOP for approval, so this is where we will have to take some additional steps by means of a commission that we're working on right now. And out of these professionalization levels, we established two certifications, two suitability certifications. The first one has to do with, or includes the first three basic levels and one specialization by role. This one is targeted towards people who work in procurement units, and the sub-level is a second certification, which is for people with specific positions that I mentioned before. So right now, specialization number 2 is optional. It's not mandatory, but we expect that in the future, these certification processes will continue to improve, of course, and we will continue to update the programs and maybe increasing some other roles or specializations within the process that can support this certification, which will have a validity of about 5 years, 5-year validity. So this is the amount of time that we will need to continue working on improvements for these education programs. Now, the first step was creating the Interinstitutional Technical Commission. We are currently working on the draft of the decree to create this commission. We have invited several institutions for this process. This is, we have invited several institutions and stakeholders to include these key stakeholders that were mentioned in the MAP study. So this commission will be a technical advisory body in order to surpass legal and technical hindrances, and the functions will be determining the guarantee mechanisms that will for the centers that will be applying these certifications, and also to establish the performance indicators and the incentives that we mentioned before. The goal is to guarantee relevance and effectiveness in this changing environment. The institutions that have answered positively to be part of this commission were the Ministry of Planning, the Association of Economic Sciences, the Agency of Public Ethics, the National Council of Municipal Training, which is more for the local government level, and the Bureau of Services. We still have two other institutions, the University of Costa Rica as a public university, and the University Fidelitas University, which is a private university. We have yet to hear back from them. So the action plan moving forward would be developing the comprehensive education system to grow the capabilities. This will also help us to approach the institutions that are working with some education programs or a professional curricula when it comes to public procurement. There's guaranteeing mechanisms for the application of the suitability certification that I mentioned before, that we will work on together with the technical commission, and the professionalization module and the accreditation module within the SDU, which is the Unified Digital System. It's important that this information is transparent and it can be seen transparently through this SDU. The information requirements were already submitted for these modules that will be developed within the system, and we hope this will also be available shortly for transparency sakes. In the mid and long term, the actions will be approving the incentives, establishing the performance assessment indicators in order to see how much progress we've made, to see whether these processes have been effective, so that this can have an impact on the indicators of the institutions per se. Another action that must be developed in the mid and long term, the mechanisms for follow-up, monitoring, and assessment, which was part of the recommendations from MAPS. And in the long term, we need to acknowledge the specialty of public procurement. And on this matter, there's a significant progress that has been made because we achieved a coordination with the Ministry of Public Education, whereby, we were able to approach them and we have a partnership now with them in order to
un acercamiento también desde la parte de educación al tema y poder establecer una
establish
especialidad técnica profesional
a
para los
professional
técnicos
technical specialty
profesionales de
for
Costa Rica
the technical
en
colleges in Costa
contratación pública,
Rica
establecer esa
in
especialidad
public
dentro de esos-
procurement matters.
dentro de
So
esos
we can
programas que dan,
establish this
a través de los colegios y darle continuidad también a
specialization
la
course in
profesionalización.
these institutions.
Se espera también a largo plazo establecer
Also, in
una
the long
segunda evaluación
term,
del
we
nivel de
would like
capacidades que
to have a
también
second
puede
assessment of
derivar
the level of
en nuevos
capabilities
procesos de
that
formación,
can
inclusive en nuevas competencias que
give us as a
necesitamos
result
establecer dentro de
new
los niveles
competencies that need to
y
be developed.
establecer ya el
And
modelo
of
de
course, we
competencias.
need to
Ojalá
establish the model
contemos
of
con el apoyo
competencies in the long term.
de los
We hope we
organismos
will have the
internacionales
support of
para este aspecto.
international bodies for this as well.
Perdón, me devolví. Los desafíos del proceso
Now, the
ya
challenges of this
mencionó
process, Jacobo
anteriormente.
already mentioned
Los
them.
dos principales, las
The
limitaciones
two
en
main
recursos
ones
financieros,
are
la insuficiencia de fondos,
limited
capacitación y
financial
certificación,
resources.
y también
I
la
mean, not
dependencia
having
del
sufficient
financiamiento
funds
externo de
for
alianzas
training and
estratégicas, lo
certification, and
cual
also the dependence
nos
or
limita un
reliance
poco
on
a
external
ello. Tal vez nos
financing
alargue un
or
poco más
a
el plazo
strategic
y
partnership. So
quisiéramos
this
poder
might
atender con prontitud
uh,
este proceso.
mean
De
that
igual
it will take us a
forma,
little
en
bit
cuanto a
longer than
recursos
usual.
humanos,
And the other
también la
challenge
dirección se
is
hizo
when it comes to
general,
human
¿verdad? No solo la
resources,
unidad de
because the
profesionalización en general,
DCOP, not only the
su
professionalization
personal,
unit,
¿verdad?
but in
Y tampoco
general,
hemos
the
tenido
entire Bureau of
pues
Public
esa
Procurement
formación para
is
atender
short
todas las necesidades y todos los nuevos temas que
of human
establece
resources,
la ley, ¿verdad? Que vamos
of
a atender.
especially of trained
Y
personnel.
también la necesidad de contar
And we also have the
con nuevos
need of
profesionales.
hiring
Y
and
lo
educating
relacionamos pues
new
también
new
de esa
people, new
continuidad
professionals.
con
And
los
that has to do
procesos
with the
de
continuity that
educación
was mentioned
que
before
ojalá
with the
logremos
education
establecer con el
processes
Ministerio de
that
Educación.
I hope we can establish
Otro de
with the
los
Ministry of
desafíos
Public
importantes,
Education.
la resistencia
Another
al cambio,
important or
esas
significant
barreras
challenge is
culturales y
resistance to
prácticas
change.
tradicionales arraigadas, pues también pueden ser un
Cultural
factor relevante,
barriers
¿verdad? Dentro
and
de las
cultural pushback
organizaciones
can be a
ante el
significant
proceso de
factor within the
profesionalización.
institutions
Esto es algo
for the
que, como lo
professionalization
mencionaba Jacobo, también ha sido
journey, just like
nuevo,
Jacobo mentioned.
¿verdad? Para el
This is
país
something quite new for our country.
entendemos también que hay que
And we
trabajar en
also
otros
understand that we have to
temas
work
de cambio dentro de este proceso.
on this
Y
matter
también la
so
falta
that
de
people
compromiso con la acción
so we don't get
demasiada
as much
parte de esta
pushback from
resistencia.
people, and also lack of commitment when it comes to adopting new
Finalmente, para
policies.
los que tengan gusto,
And
pueden encontrar el plan
you
estratégico de
can find
profesionalización en
the
la
strategic
página oficial
professionalization
del
plan
Ministerio
in
de
the
Hacienda,
official website of the
más
Ministry of
detalles, contratación
Finance of
pública,
Costa Rica.
autoridad de contratación pública,
You can
planes
see more
aprobados,
details such as
encuentran
public
un enlace
procurement,
para
the
descargar el
authority of public
documento
procurement,
y
and
si
approved
queda alguna
plans. This
duda
is the link.
relacionada
And if you
con
have
el
any
proceso, pues también
questions
está disponible
regarding
el
the
correo
process,
electrónico de la dirección
you can email
para que puedan enviar las
the
consultas.
bureau
Y esta sería mi presentación.
at
Muchas
this
gracias.
address. And this was my presentation. Thank you very much.
Arelis, mil gracias por esa
Arelis, thank you
presentación
so
muy completa.
much for
Creo
that
que
very
nos queda muy
specific
claro tanto lo
presentation.
que ha
I
logrado,
think it's
hacia
very
dónde va, pero
clear what
también
you've done,
esos
where
desafíos
you're headed, but
que
also
se
the
presentan en este
challenges
momento y que, bueno,
that
ojalá
you are
que puedan
facing.
solucionarlos para
And I
seguir
hope they
implementando
can be
esa
solved to
estrategia.
continue
Nos
implementing this
quedan
strategy.
5 minutos
So we
y
only have
me
5 minutes
gustaría
left, and
ver
I
si
would like
alcanzamos
to
a hablar
see
de
if we
algunos de
can
los temas que están
talk
aquí pues
about
en las
some of the
preguntas.
topics that are
Yo le
here
pediría a Jacobo
in the Q&A.
seguramente
So
hagamos la
Jacobo,
primera y la tercera pregunta. Entonces voy a
maybe
intentar resumir un poco. La primera se
I'll try to
refiere
summarize the
a
first
la
question. The first one
interconexión
has
con
to
sistemas
do
de
with the
planificación
interconnection with
y
planning
cómo esto pues, puede
systems
repercutir en
and how
materia
this can have
de
an impact
profesionalización
on
de los
the
contratos públicos.
professionalization of
Quiero
public
también, Jacobo,
procurement.
si
And I
pudieras
think,
comentar
Jacobo,
muy
if you
concretamente
can
acerca de
help us
cómo
out and
funciona
talk a little bit about
esa evaluación.
how this assessment
Aquí, pues,
works,
lo que dice la persona es
what
que se esperaría que fuera
the person is
la
asking
evaluación sea
is
personal
is that she expects the assessment to be personal. I mean, if you're assessing a public procurement official, that how can you make sure that they're only assessing that specific official, and what do different officials do to become part of these programs, and what kind of external stakeholders, for instance, the Central American Institute of Public Administration or other foreign bodies that can support these initiatives. So maybe we can start with Jacobo, if you can talk about planning and assessment, please. Jacobo? Thank you, Nicolas. Well, the question regarding planning is very significant because in our survey, we took the skills, for instance, from Procure PU, which is the professionalization matrix that is used by the EU countries. And we asked the people, which of these skills do you need more support in, or do you need to strengthen them more? And the one that was mentioned the most, with I think it was 34%. Yeah, 34% was planning. That was number one. So what can we do to strengthen planning or to improve planning? Of course, we need to include it in the professionalization framework that's being developed. That's a basic activity that if it's not done properly, it will snowball and it will create more problems throughout the procurement process. And this is part of the recommendation from the OECD regarding public procurement, which is linking planning and budgetary processes with public procurement, for instance, by means of electronic systems. So there's interoperability, so they can share information, and hence they can be consistent regarding what's there. For instance, there's a specific budget allocated for this and that. And regarding assessment, we were saying that certain decisions have to be made regarding the details on how the certification will work. For instance, if it will be based on tests or activities or practical exercises, or if it will be an individual exercise. To assess teamwork skills, which is soft skill, that's also necessary. And how often the officials have to be certified, the different levels. So all these things are part of the implementation, and the DCOP will have to work on that to have a specific order for the professionalization strategy. Thank you, Jacobo. So now, Arelis, we have several questions for you. I don't think we will be able to answer all of them due to time constraints. But I don't know if you can tell us one, what we mentioned before about the different strategic partners. And there's some other questions that have to do more with more of the operations of the strategy. For instance, what happens with the people that already have some training or that have undergone training? Will it be recognized? Which institutions will be included in the first phase? And whether this includes the entire personnel, the entire public procurement workforce, or only institutional supplierships. Thank you, Nicolas. Well, regarding the commission, it's important to be clear that the aim of this commission is to include key stakeholders within the process. We would like to have all of them, but of course, that would be maybe a little bit difficult or too complex to work with too many institutions. but we will write down the name of this institute that you mentioned in the chat or in the Q&A, which is the Central American Institute for Public Administration. Now, regarding who will be part of this certification and education processes, well, the process is designed to include everyone. However, there are different certifications. Those who work in institutional supplierships will have to undergo the, let's say, the larger certification, the one that includes all three main basic levels, plus the role specialization, which is mandatory. And then the specialization by topics that has to do with sustainability, innovation, healthcare, technology, public works. So that one is not mandatory, is optional, but it can be considered and it can be taken into account so that maybe it will be mandatory in the future. And then we had the first sub-level that we saw in the slide, and that sub-level has basic topics that everyone that works in public procurement must be aware of. Ethics, the phases of the procurement process, all these things are included in that first sub-level, where people who work in the process will participate, but not people who work in institutional suppliership. So I think I answered all your questions. Did I forget any, Jacobo? Well, we're getting more questions, but two things. We are running out of time, so first of all, I'd like to say that, of course, there's a lot more information than the one we shared in this call, and it is available in the assessment report and the matrix of indicators that details each one of the criteria, including, for instance, the type of institutions that are in Costa Rica today that could potentially support this professionalization journey. So this was the presentation of the report. But beyond that, of course, Arelis, correct me if I'm wrong, but in the country, in Costa Rica, you will let people know when the different stages are coming. I mean, this is not the only time where we will talk about this, but we will continue to have discussions and through the corresponding channels. Yes, that is correct. We are just getting started on this journey and creating this commission. So we still have a lot of work to do, as you all know, to develop all these capabilities and skills. We are making all the efforts to contact universities, the academia, to see who is interested in developing these kinds of contents in order to strengthen the professionalization market in the country, in order to have programs for all institutions, because we have a lot of institutions that are included here, and even the private individuals that manage these funds that are included in the law must also be part of these processes. But we are just getting started, like I said before, and along the way, we will let all the stakeholders and the institutions know of how we are doing. Thank you very much, Arelis, Jacobo. I would also like to thank all the participants and attendees, Miguel, Javier, Paulo, also Mr. Ambassador, Elias, and all of you, all of the attendees. I hope you can read this report, this assessment report that has a lot of very valuable information regarding what Costa Rica wants to do, and it can be very useful for other countries as well.
And we hope to see you in future events from the MAP Secretariat. Muchas gracias. Hasta luego.
Gracias, buen día.
Thank you, Nicolás. Gracias a todos.
Gracias. Gracias, buen día, hasta luego.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.